I put my bag down beside the desk, pulled out my chair, and opened my laptop. After being away from the office for a few days, I had a long list of unread emails waiting for me. I placed my notebook to the right of the keyboard and opened the spreadsheet I had been working on. That was when the market board behind it caught my eye. The stock that had been bothering me before was in the green. I brought the market board forward and looked more closely. I was still at a loss, but it had become much smaller. My orders kept appearing at higher prices, and the distance between the current price and my cost basis was now only a few steps. In the previous sessions, every time I opened my portfolio, that negative number was still there. Now, I could see it shrinking right in front of me. I brought the spreadsheet back to the center of the screen. I replied to an email and adjusted a few figures. When I switched windows to look for a document, the market board appeared behind them again. The buyers had moved up another step. I opened my portfolio, took another look, then went back to work. The sound of keyboards, ringing phones, and conversations continued around the office. And each time I looked again, the negative number in my account had become a little smaller. Then it disappeared. The stock had returned to a round cost basis. I looked at the screen for a few more seconds, then leaned back in my chair. There was no profit, but somehow that was already enough to make me feel better. When the price was still below this level, all I wanted was for the stock to come back here. And now, that number was right in front of me. I closed my portfolio, brought my work documents back up, and continued with what I had left unfinished. Across the office, a few people were talking. I kept looking at my screen until I heard the name of a familiar stock. One of my coworkers was smiling as he said he had bought it earlier, and today it was up strongly again. The person sitting beside him asked what price he had bought at. He gave them a number. Someone else quickly did the math and said that was already a pretty good profit. They talked for a little longer, then the sound of keyboards filled the office again. The cursor on my screen was still sitting in the data cell I had been working on. I finished the row, checked one of the numbers, then switched to the market board. After a few keystrokes, the stock they had just mentioned appeared. The price was rising sharply. I opened the chart and moved back to the price range my coworker had mentioned. The distance from there to the current price was large enough that I started calculating how much he must have made. As soon as I finished the calculation, I switched to my own portfolio. The stock that had just returned to my cost basis was still there. I looked at the chart beside it once more. On one side was the long rise from the price where my coworker had bought. On the other was a number that had only just brought my account back to where it started, for some reason. The relief I had felt when I first saw that number had already faded a little. I closed the chart and went back to the spreadsheet. My phone rang. I picked it up and stepped into the hallway. After finishing the work call, I returned to my desk. The glass of water beside me was almost empty. I had barely put my phone down when my eyes stopped again on the market board behind my work window. My coworker's stock had moved up another step. I brought it forward. My stock was still around the same price. Two numbers sat in different places on the screen. I looked at the price where my coworker had bought, then at the amount of money sitting in my portfolio. Another calculation appeared in my mind. If that money had been in his stock from that price, how different would my account look now? I opened the calculator. The number was bigger than I expected. I closed it and got up with everyone else. Lunch boxes were opened, and the conversation around the table quickly moved from work to other things. My phone was still beside my hand. A notification appeared from a group I regularly followed by new messages about several stocks that were rising strongly. Someone had just taken profit. Someone else posted a screenshot of their portfolio filled with green numbers. My finger stopped on the image for a moment before moving to the trading app. My stock was still around my cost basis. There was no new bad information. The price was actually better than it had been during the sessions that had made me uncomfortable. I turned off the screen, placed the phone beside my lunchbox, and went back to listening to everyone. But only a few minutes later, my eyes dropped toward the phone lying quietly on the table again. Back at my desk, I continued filling in the spreadsheet. Outside the window, the patch of sunlight on the building across the street had shifted to one side. Phones kept ringing around the office, and more people were moving through the hallway. Every time I switched windows, the market board appeared behind them, and my eyes were beginning to pick out the stocks rising strongly almost immediately. One was up more than 4%. Another was approaching its ceiling price. My coworker's stock was still among the stronger performers. Mine moved up one step, then slipped back down. I opened another stock. Its price had been rising for several sessions in a row. Another stock I remembered seeing at a much lower level was also in the green. I moved the chart back, and the cursor stopped on an earlier candle. If I had bought there, the difference between that price and where it was now would not have been small either. I closed the chart. The notebook beside my keyboard was still open to the page where I had written about the stock I was holding. I pulled it closer. My reason for buying was still there. The price range was still there. The things I needed to keep watching were still exactly where I had written them. I read through a few lines, then moved the notebook aside. My phone vibrated with a work message. After replying, I returned to the market board. My coworker's stock was still green. Mine had just turned slightly red. Only one price step. My eyes stopped there. The profit I had just calculated on the other stock came back into my mind, along with the money sitting in my portfolio. What if I switched to another stock? I reopened the chart of the stock that had been rising strongly. Price had already traveled quite a long way. I moved the cursor across several sessions until it stopped at the current price. I looked at the volume. I looked at the rise that had already taken place. Then I switched back to my portfolio. A coworker walked past my desk and stopped to ask about the work I was doing. I switched back to the document, spoke with him for a few minutes, then continued finishing the remaining rows. When he left, the spreadsheet was still in the middle of the screen. I entered a few more cells, checked the figures, then stopped at the end of a row. I brought the market board back up. My stock had returned to exactly around my cost basis. I looked at that number for quite a while. This was the same price that, when it first appeared in my portfolio, had made me lean back in my chair and feel relieved. Now it was still there. I looked across the office. My coworker was leaning toward his screen, both hands on the keyboard. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't talking about the stock anymore. I turned back to my portfolio. The number was almost exactly the same, but the way I felt about it was different. The closing bell sounded from someone's computer. I closed the market board and finished the rest of my work. One by one, chairs around the office were pushed back into place, while people called goodbye to each other near the door. My coworker walked past my desk, said something about tomorrow's work, then headed toward the elevator. He didn't mention the stock. I put my notebook into my bag, turned off the screen, and walked out. The elevator doors closed. The floor numbers slowly counted down. When I reached the ground floor, I took my keys from my pocket and started walking toward the parking area. I had only gone a short distance when my phone vibrated. It was a message from a woman I knew through a charity group I had once been part of. I hadn't seen her in a long time. She wrote, "If anyone is free this weekend, could you come and help me? It's urgent."